certain contractions that are physical have an emotional background. So when you really go there, like for instance, I have a thing in my shoulder that shows up when I get really, really overworked, like overwork, computer stuff. So when I start moving that particular thing, it loads up some of the stress, the emotional stress of that particular event that it's connected to. So when I release the shoulder, it's a physical pain, but it has an emotional component. Or sometimes when you go into an emotion, you suddenly have a physical feeling. Sometimes this happens with grief, where you have, emotional grief, but then it hurts somewhere in the body. So that's how I slice it. Nonlinear movement would be any movement that is not a structure. Within nonlinear movement, there is habitual movements that we do when we run out of new movements, so to speak, right? So we all have certain ways we tend to move. And they're still nonlinear because they're not structured in a certain way, but particularly longer practices, and when you are not so used to it, it can happen that you kind of get stuck in a certain kind of emotion. Maybe you tend to go kind of sideways a bit more, or you do a lot of shaking. And then what's interesting is to do motions that are different than your usual motions. So for instance, I gave a few examples. So if you tend to be very round and sideways, you could go up and down, right? And kind of get very jerky with your motions, so that something else happens in the body, and that can bring up different kinds of sensations and feelings. So non-habitual would be anything that is not your usual way of moving. Some people tend to move very fast, and then it's very interesting when they slow it way down. They get super subtle. And then for some people, it's the opposite. They tend to go really slow and kind of almost sluggish. And then when they really, 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 kind of shake it out, something else can come up. So that's how I define it.
Hi, Michaela. So great to see you and everybody that's practicing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so excited that you're providing this online. I know that I have been practicing nonlinear for over a year now, but obviously that was indirectly, not directly through you, and I could tell the difference. So
Mm-hmm.
thank you. I know you said there's like 9 layers to nonlinear as far as but usually there's only 5 that I'm trying to recall from the last call.
Mm-hmm.
But basically I'm bringing it up to ask, will we get into some of the like calling in or some of the other aspects aside from the release? And obviously we did the heart today, so that was my question.
Yes. Yes. Well, there's many ways to apply nonlinear, and I've been at this for close to 30 years, and I'm still creating new. And so when we teach practitioners, we teach 5 different ways of applying it. And actually, as a matter of fact, Steve and I have decided yesterday, I haven't actually announced that yet because we don't have the details, we're going to do a full teacher and practitioner training online. Because usually we only do it in person, but now that I've gotten used to teaching nonlinear, on Zoom, and I've actually found some really creative ways to add extra layers to it, we're gonna do a full practitioner and teacher training online. Because one of the interesting things about the different modalities is you can't teach nonlinear. People come for a class and then they go and they try and teach it. You can't teach nonlinear unless you've actually embodied the practice. And so there's ways that you can embody the practice in a very specific way that allow you to then unfold it and kind of transmit it to other people, which is why it's so much more powerful when you are guided by somebody who has practice under their belt. Than when you do it by yourself. But we do teach 5 in level 1. We've just decided we're going to do a level 2 teacher training where we'll teach another 3. And then I have another 5 or 6 that I use when I teach workshops that are, you know, somewhat specific. The 4 of the 5 that we teach our teacher trainers, I'm going to offer online. And I'm also going to offer some other variations, some creative stuff, just for the fun of it, because why not? So yes, we will get into the calling in. We'll go into the calling in specifically on the 3-hour creativity session, because that's kind of really fun to do. We'll also look at different ways of engaging with the nervous system in the realms of release. We'll be playing around with all kinds of things as we can, because I have the time to do so right now. So it's going to be fun to do that.
Well, that's so exciting. So obviously I'll look forward to hearing all about it, because I know I got the polarity certification and I know I wanted to do nonlinear. So I'm excited that.
Yeah, and even if you don't want to teach nonlinear, this particular will be a practitioner training. So even if you don't want to teach, we go kind of and look under the hood. We'll look at trauma in the body, coping patterns, you know, we'll do all kinds of stuff. But in each of the sessions I'm introducing one layer of a modality, and I'll also get a little bit creative as we progress over the summer. So,
and just to clarify that with these nonlinear sessions, you'll add on to those.
Yeah.
And you'll also make available the
well, each nonlinear session is freestanding the way we do it here. So people who just want to come once can come, but I will vary the offerings every time so that when people come, it's a fresh experience every time.
Wonderful. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. At some point, the boundaries of my body felt fuzzy and I felt a bit unsafe, was moving at medium space, and I slowed down a bit and my skin became more clear. It changed for the next song. Can you say something about that? Well, I don't know what you mean with unsafe, unless you mean that you were flailing around so wildly that you didn't know where you began or ended. But the good thing about nonlinear, when it's taught the way it's supposed to be taught, which is as a non-imposition, meaning there's no force, no pushing somebody to the edge or any of those kind of things that people sometimes do. It's very important in nonlinear that it's a self-generated practice. Then that feeling of the, let's say, what you call unsafety, immediately gave you feedback to change your movement. And so that's actually a sign that you're doing a good practice, because your body lets you know what it needs. And that's really, really actually good. And so the changing of boundaries and meaning that, you know, feeling kind of super expanded and then really feeling stuff. Some people sometimes get nauseous, or, you know, they have, like Betsy was saying, burping or things like that. So that expanding and contracting is part of regular nonlinear practice. It's a somatic component of feeling. And so actually, who was this? Maya, that was good practice, that you felt that you needed to slow down. And that's pretty good. Sophie says, when I moved with tension in my upper back neck, I started crying every time I repeated that movement. It felt strange, as if I was aware of my body crying without really feeling sad. Is this a kind of release then? Yes, it is. Often our muscle tensions have emotional components in them. And so when we release certain tensions in the body, the emotional component kind of washes out. And because that's old stuff, right, that's not current, it might not have a very deep feeling sense to it. It just washes out. And that's a common thing. People go, well, I'm crying, but I'm not really feeling that much. That's the function of release. That's actually really good practice. Teresa is saying, I yawned and yawned. Yes, I addressed that in the frequently asked question. Yawning is a form of release. And also, when you do nonlinear, you're sensitizing to the messages of your body. And sometimes your body is just really tired and we override that. And we just go, yeah, well, whatever, you know, next, let the adrenals do the work. And then when you actually feel through the layers of your body, suddenly you can feel like just the fatigue and, oof, you know, and so that's really good to just let yourself rest when you can, yawn, release, and, you know, let it go. So. What if many and a lot of movement feels like almost too much? Like my mind telling me my body should move while my body just wants to rest or feels the movement of the diaphragm feels already enough. When we work with the body will have different messages. Some of those messages are messages that are the actual message of the body, right? So slow down, I am tired, you know, emotions, things like that. Other things are more habitual ways of containing energy or clamping down on expression. So for instance, often when we do new movements or new activity, there might be resistance in the realm of the expression. And then we feel kind of bored or tired or that we should dial it down. So you have to feel, Barbara, what is it? Is it the message of the natural movement of the body, or is it some kind of resistance? And how you do that is you just stick with it without thinking too much about it. You just explore. You go faster, you see what happens. You go slower, you see what happens. You follow one instinct, you follow the other instinct. And then you actually calibrate and fine tune your perception of your body's needs. And it becomes a much more finely honed communication to all parts of you. Because there's always the mind, the emotion, and the body, and they all give messages. And this is one way that you can experiment and play with that. Katie said, I found when you said to move your body as love, I really got into my head. Yeah, you know, sometimes that happens. You know, that's just keep on moving, I would say. Also, when we move as love, one of the ways that's kind of really useful is if you think of someone or something that you really love and feel that love in your body and then move that love through the body. And then your head space is occupied by the visual or by the feeling or by the memory of someone you love. And that sometimes allows us to access love a bit easier. So, but in general, anytime you get into your head, just keep on moving. It will eventually, you know, just wash out. We're heady beings. There's nothing wrong with the head. More recently, I'm having a lot of resistance engaging with any emotion or feelings during the nonlinear practice. As the music starts, I just feel like lying down and listening to the music. Yeah, when you have moments of resistance, which we all do, they come in a few forms. And one of the forms of resistance comes at is feeling tired or lazy or not wanting to move. Another one is boredom. Boredom's a good one. And typically the thing to know about those kind of moments is that on one end you can heed the, you know, the kind of feeling of, nah, I don't want to do much, and just do very little, but keep one part of your body moving. So even if you're laying down listening to the music, move one part of your body, just move your hand, or just move your hip. Don't freeze into the boredom or fatigue or contraction. You're not going to wear yourself out moving a hand. So, even if your body really needs to rest, if you keep some movement going, that's a little bit like the breadcrumb that leads down the path to wherever that particular feeling comes from. So that's why we always say, keep on moving, keep on moving, keep on moving. Gabriella is saying, how long is it okay to stay with thought loops, especially if they're making way for more creativity and expansion? I don't think there's any rule as to how long you stay with something. I would stay with something till it ends, right? So, because that's the whole idea, is you don't actually mess with your system. So if you have a thought loop, if it doesn't transform, if the thought loop keeps on going, you can change the movements of your body. And usually with non-habitual movements, the thought loop gets interrupted. So that's always an option if you want to. Barbara says, I realize I just felt and still feel really tired. My body's craving some rest and less business, like a counterpart to my mind, which is a bit stressed out lately. Yes, that can definitely happen. And that means, just resting a bit more. It's usually such that our mind is a lot more active than what our body would like, simply because the mind tends to generate a lot of forward motion while the body has a different way of processing. So, giving rest to our nervous system and with that to our body is always a good idea. Eva is saying, sometimes I feel that I have a lot of energy in my head, but I can still connect to a lot of pleasure. Can you say something about that? Well, no. And what I mean by that is energy moves through the body, and some people tend to move all their energy up and then they can't feel their body anymore. And some people tend to have energy in their head and in their lower body at the same time, and that's also fine. Sometimes, people generate a lot of pleasure by fantasizing, so their head is really involved and their lower body is involved. So there's no right or wrong. In general, there's no right or wrong with energy distribution. The important thing about energy distribution is how you can detect it and then use it. So what I mean by that is, when you're sensitive to where energy is in your body, meaning it's pooled up here, you have a headache, your shoulders and your neck are really tight, it might take a few days for that tension to leave. And then the energy gets distributed more evenly. Or some people have a lot of energy in the lower body, but they feel kind of a bit fuzzy up here. And the knowing where energy sits and knowing how to move energy through the body means you can use the energy optimally for what you want to use it. So if you want a lot of pleasure, you bring your energy down into the lower body. If you need to really think and plan and focus, you bring your energy up into the head. If you want to have kind of a more holistic experience of your environment and your relationships, you'll make sure that the energies are both in the head, in the heart, and the lower body. And that's, that it's a useful tool. It's not this is better than this, or it needs to be this way. It's a personalized exploration on, how it goes. Vicky said, do I understand this correctly? In nonlinear, there are 5 modalities taught. One was the last time feel. No, I'll tell you that in a second. This time we did release. If so, what are the other 2? Also, is it common to get side effects from the practice? The first time I got super tired for a day, and then after the second time I had an incredible strong headache. Well, there's no side effects in the sense that there's predictable side effects, but any time you connect with your body, and you can really feel your body, you will feel things that happen in the body, right? So like I was saying earlier, if you suddenly sensitize to the messages of your body, there can be tension, right? Or pain that you suddenly feel. I don't know if you've ever gone to a massage and come out more achy than you came in. That often has to do with the fact that you're suddenly aware of the pains and aches and contractions in the body. Not necessarily that your massage therapist inflicted pain on you. You're just much, much more sensitive to them. The same with nonlinear. It can happen that you sensitize to the messages of your body and you find you have a lot of pain. It can also be that you start moving some stuff around and you can really feel an area where stuff has gotten stuck. Or it's a sign that you should be resting more, having more water or things like that. And as I was saying earlier, of course, fatigue is usually a sign that your body needs rest. So if you're really tired, heed the message of your body and give your body a bit more rest. Most of us run on our adrenals and not so much on our readily generated energy. And then as far as the modalities, yes, we teach 5 to our practitioners, one of which is a modality that's only taught for trauma therapists and people who are in the field as qualified therapists, which is personal release, a specific release. The other ones are moving what you're feeling, release, pleasure practice, and calling in. And I'll introduce different aspects of that and different subcategories of that with each section of the teaching. So I'll be teaching every 2 weeks throughout the summer, and we'll do variations on that. We'll combine certain things. We'll use some of the other ones that I teach in our regular longer workshops, and I'll get a bit creative with it so that everybody gets to experience fun stuff.
The first time I did non-linear was a couple of weeks ago when you did the session, and I have a question about eyes opening. And I had the experience that you described where, the thinking process begins and the eyes respond immediately. And so I kind of closed my eyes and carried on. It happened a couple of times. This time, though, it was a very different experience. That I had a moment where the eyes opened as a response to the movement itself as a form of release. Mm-hmm. That really makes sense. So the feeling was coming from very deep and came more to the surface. And as it came out into the world, the eyes opened as a response, as a movement also. And so I just happen. And I'm wondering whether there are differences in how the eyes respond and whether it was appropriate. It felt appropriate today. It didn't last very long, but I kept the eyes open because that's where the movement was moving. Mm-hmm. And then once that release had happened, the eyes just kind of naturally closed.
Yeah.
Whereas 2 weeks ago, it was more kind of conceptualized.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if there is a difference.
There is a difference, and you described it beautifully, right? And that's the only way you will know that difference is through practice, of course, right? And through having discernment around the distinction. And yes, there is a difference. There's that, oh God, I just forgot the milk, right? That kind of, or why did he say that? And then suddenly you start thinking. That's the one where you, as much as you can, immediately close your eyes. There's also, like you said, that thing that is partly a release, or it has like a strong emotional feeling to it. And as you said rightly, then it closes again naturally. So that's perfectly fine, right? When you can tell the difference, you can make a good judgment on how to go. I sometimes, when I do longer practices, use a little blindfold so that I still have the kind of darkness and the feeling of the internal sensation, even though that can happen. But that's a personal choice and a matter of personal taste. It's not like, oh God, you opened your eyes, it's all ruined. It's just something to notice that that's one of the ways we do, you know, throw things off.
That was really amazing. Thank you so much for facilitating that. I've got a question about the music and the relationship between the music and the practice, because I'm a musician. I got a bit involved with it, I think, and I couldn't. I noticed that my body, the feelings in my body changed a lot depending on the music, and particularly the rhythm, the kind of feeling quality of the music. And then I kind of got in this hole where I was wondering if I was moving with the music rather than moving with my feeling. And then I was like, but they're the same thing. And anyway, I was wondering if you could just talk about that a bit.
Yes, it doesn't really matter. Sometimes with musicians, you have a little bit of a handicap there. And I certainly sometimes practice without music completely, because I don't want to be influenced by music. I sometimes practice with, I have crickets and frogs out in the yard. So sometimes in the evening I go out and I essentially move to the crickets and frogs and things like that. So you could do that, but it doesn't matter, because the interesting thing is when you work with release and the contractions in your body, the contraction around doing it right, and the contraction about not knowing if it's the music or what it is a contraction that probably shows up in other ways too. Because nonlinear practice is your life, right? And your life is a nonlinear practice. So you can work with that irritation and that not knowing as a contraction that you can unknot.
Okay, thank you. That,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. I wouldn't worry too much about it, because every session is different, and every, you know, wherever you've been before, and your mindset and, you know, your biochemistry and everything plays into it. So you'll just work with whatever you've got. You can't do wrong.
That's great to hear. Thank you.
Thank you.
The question that I have this time is, so on the left side of my body, there's significant stuff going on. And there's two in particular, kind of around the neck and the shoulder and the lower hip, the back, and it's like a train that's kind of locked in, and they're both connected. Yeah. One will flag, but it's kind of linked to the other, and I can feel them. And, you know, my nature is to kind of get in there, you know, like Bodily, and go in and bore down and try to unpick it and unpack it. And, you know, I'm ravenously curious about things. And so, you know, to just kind of step back, and I noticed myself rolling around it, you know, getting into it. And then I had to keep telling myself, no, step back, like just be with it, you know, like just let it be. And then I found myself like offering prayer into it, like, show me how to love you enough, you know. But I don't know how to let it go. And all the movements that I'm doing, it's just so locked in my body, you know. And I, yeah, help.
Well, there's a few things to be said. The first thing is, I think the prayer and the love is the way to go, right? And that's why at the end we did a piece on infusing even the contraction with love. Yeah. Because there's nothing in your body that isn't love, so to speak, or that isn't, you know, you. And so often when we attack something really head on, particularly if it has a muscular quality to it, then what happens in the body is the body protects, because there's a reason why it is what it is. Yeah. Right? Could be an emotional reason, a mental reason, habitual, injury, right? It doesn't matter what it is, or a combination thereof. Often in the body, we have a weak spot, and then on the weak spot, injuries and, you know, contractions attach. So whatever the reason it is that it's tight, that's your body protecting. And so when you go in there, often the body, you know, kind of goes, whoa, 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 whoa. So a good strategy is to dial it way back. And to, you know, Steve, my teaching partner, often talks about 70%. And I would go even further back, probably, you know, to about 50%, and just be with it, and maybe go really, really subtle and really slow, so that you can actually articulate the area versus, you know, kind of drilling in there. And even though the music was strong and primal, you don't have to go with the music. You can just go at like a quarter speed or something. You didn't hear the music anyway, which was probably good. So that's how I would do it. You know, speaking to it, so to speak, and saying to that part of the body, you have protected me well, right? Thank you for creating this protection, because that meant I didn't get any extra injury. But now I'm going to protect us in a different way, right? And really let that be said, so that the part of your body that goes, can go, okay,
We got
can
this.
step down.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
Hello.
I wanted to hear more about your journey with your shoulder. I remember first reading about it in Wild Woman's Way, and you talking about like rolling forward, like pushing a boulder on your right shoulder. And that was like this gut punch of like insight to me, because I have this right shoulder that rolls forward that I've been having chiropractors put back, and it goes right back for years. And so I've been doing nonlinear from the book for about a year, and just kind of asking it like, hey, why are you doing that? What's going on? And just hoping that more would come up. But I don't know if I've learned much more about it. So I'm just curious how you kind of worked on not being in that chronic pain and having more awareness of when it's starting to go into that place for you.
Yeah, so one of the things I did, this goes with what I just described, is I'd go super subtle. So I'd like lay on my back, you know, and I just, or sit like I'm sitting here, and I'd just explore it. And I'd go really, really, really slow. And when I'd go really slow, then there would be an emotional quality to it. And that I would let myself feel the emotional quality. And the emotional quality was a quality of the soldier, right? Like the raw power, kind of like, oh, I'm gonna do this, right? And it had like a you know, shoulder to the grindstone kind of a feeling. And then I kind of played with that, and then under that was overwhelm and being tired, right? And this feeling of, you know, just never going to get ahead of this enormous email, you know, load or whatever, right? It was mostly, it's computer work that does it to me. You know, just I get sometimes a couple of thousand emails in a day. So it's very, and so I had to really work then with the emotion of that overwhelm and that feeling of it sitting on top of me. And then what I then did, and this is something that you might try, is I then worked very strongly, and I alluded to that in the practice as well, with intensifying the movement and the contraction. And so then, you know, I'd go like, you know, and I would really, 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 really do it. And then when I did that, I could feel the rest of the contraction, which went all the way to my right thigh. So when I really started intensifying, then it got like really, really strong. And then I could feel kind of the twist of my body all the way down. And so then I would intensify and breathe, intensify and breathe, and move and release. And I did that for quite a way, you know, a while, till the layers kind of gave way. You know? So that's how I did it. But often the subtle thing, to do the very subtle thing first, really makes a difference. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Kai says, I struggle with a lot of nausea during the practice. Nausea is not common for me. Wondering if there are any suggestions for working with this. That is in the frequently asked questions as well, Kai, because this is a common thing. Nausea is a hallmark of release, and it can happen quite a bit. So there's a few ways one can deal with the nausea. Yeah, thanks, Casey just gave the frequently asked question video. One of the ways is you slow way down, right? So that's one way to go. You can also lay down. That's another option. If you get really nauseous, if you lay down and let your body rest and just move, you know, the fingers or the arms or the hips a bit, then that will do the trick. I tend to not want to engage conscious breathing in nonlinear because I think it's very important that the body gets to do whatever the body wants to do and develop its own wisdom. But if you have very strong nausea, then you can also kind of go on your hands and knees, feeling down into the body and really breathing down, because sometimes nausea comes from breathing up. You know, sometimes people, when they start really moving and releasing, they kind of, you know, do this, which is the motion of throwing up. And just when I do this, my entire system goes kind of weird. And then the other thing you can do is you can rub downwards on your body. And that really does a nice job as well. So I could just reverse the thing I just did by rubbing down. So those are some of the strategies for nausea. But I would say that, you know, if you can just be with it, that's also very good. And I've said this in the frequently asked question recording. I used to practice with a puke bucket next to me because I had such, you know, strong nausea there for a while when I was working through a specific layer of my experience that I kind of needed that. So that's one answer.
I wonder if you have any suggestions for moving to or from nonlinear to a more seated, focused meditation practice. Before, after, like pop in and out, any words would be helpful.
Is meditation one of your regular practices that you constantly do, or are you trying to start a meditation practice?
So I had a regular practice, and then I kind of set it aside when I started doing the nonlinear and started devoting that time to nonlinear. And now I'm in a program that's asking me to do like a seated mindfulness practice every day. So now I'm trying to do both, and I'm just wondering how I might put them nicely together.
There's a few options, right? So if you have to sequence them, right? So meaning you have only one time in the day where you can do your practice. And so you have to do nonlinear and whatever else you do and meditation at the same time. There's certain things to consider. And then if you can do them at separate times, I would do them at separate times. So how I often do it is I do when I like have I'm writing my next book, so I'm you know in a somewhat focused creative place where my mind starts going pretty crazy. So I meditate in the morning, and then I do release and movement and smoothing things out in the evening. But if I know, for instance, that I have a lot of office work to do and I will sit all day, then I start my day, or if I'm anxious or, you know, traveling or whatever, and I start my day with some nonlinear, and then I sit in the evening to kind of, you know, settle my mind if there was a lot going on. So those are, you can feel what would be best. Practice should support your life, right? That's really the important piece. If practice doesn't support your life, you're not going to be able to maintain it. Right. So that's the first thing. If you have to group them together, once again, what I would probably do is experiment with what feels better. I would intuitively say for you, move first. And when your body has kind of moved the stuff out, then sit, right? So that would be my, gut feeling for you. But that could change, right? And you might feel that you want to sit and do your mindfulness practice first and then move with whatever has come up that hasn't completely dissolved, right? But I would probably do movement first and then settle down and sit. And I have on occasion, when I do it all together, found that also to be extremely blissful because my body is awake. And so I can really meditate in a much more embodied way than when I just park myself straight out of bed. It's kind of like, it has a different quality to it. But in general, I would always say with embodied practice of any kind, no one size fits all, and you always want to experiment. And I'm a big believer into, essentially trying all the options, feeling what it feels like, getting really sensitive to the needs of your body and your practice, and then doing that. Can you say more about release? You were talking about this while describing your arm process. There's different ways one can release, right? So one of the ways, that's a fairly common way that people release in general, not just in nonlinear, is you intensify a contraction, either emotionally or physically. So you kind of do the thing really, really, really strong and like really tense the muscles and everything, and then, kind of move it out. And often when we do that, then you can really feel the uprising of the emotion that comes from underneath the physical contraction. So that's one way one can release. Another way you can release is you can kind of, how when you have when you bumped yourself and it hurts a bit, and you can kind of press on it and it gets like worse and worse the more you press on it, but it also kind of, you want to do it because you want to feel it, that kind of a scab, picking of a scab. You can kind of use that kind of process in your body where you just stay on it and you stay on it and you kind of move with whatever that is till you become hypersensitive to it. And you can really detect what it is and you let it just dissolve, as you do that, which it will eventually. It's like a knot in a muscle. That's another way of releasing. And then, of course, you can release by actually moving so that things release, right? That's another option where you just feel the movement that will release the area emotionally or physically and let that happen. There's one caveat to that. Sometimes people throw things off versus feeling that all the way through to the release. So sometimes you see people do all these motions and they're fidgeting and they're, doing all this stuff, not even in nonlinear, but in their lives. And it's a way to not have to feel it. And that is not a good thing. So you have to feel it, feel it, feel it, feel it. And then from that feeling, move it out and move it out of your body. And those are some of the kind of ways that you can release. Now, there is, of course, using sound for release, right? Particularly when you're home alone, you could certainly use sound for release. Once again, if you're just throwing the energy off, you'll notice because it won't go away for very long. But you can play with sound. Somebody's saying here, I ended up growling and hissing. Absolutely, all kinds of stuff happens. Sometimes people start burping or farting or both at the same time, or or crying or whatever. That's all fine. As long as the neighbors are not calling the police on you, you are fine. Definitely. All right, Christine is saying something. Kai is saying, do you have any playlists to share? Yes. So Casey posted this and you also received this as part of your nonlinear registration. We made a page, and on that page is the intro video with all the ins and outs of nonlinear. There's the frequently asked questions, and on the bottom are some playlists of some of our teacher trainers and some of the things I'm using. Christine is saying, sometimes I feel I could spend almost my entire practice on my back, moving slowly and with subtle movements today especially. Should I encourage myself to move differently and switch it up? It's like what you said about dialing back and moving with subtlety. That's not my usual way of moving, but I found it hard to allow myself to do this with the very rhythmic music. Well, once again, it's a matter of experimentation. So sometimes particularly when we work with releasing things from the nervous system, we hit resistance that looks like being tired, or it looks like having to go to the bathroom, or it looks like wanting to be very subtle, or it looks like wanting to jump up and down like a madman or madwoman. And it's really a way to avoid the thing. So a good strategy is that you allow your impulse to happen. So you move very subtle, or you move very loud, or whatever. And then about halfway in, I said, go for some non-habitual movements. Another way of saying is switch it up from what you're doing, and then do the opposite of what you've been doing. So if you were really, really subtle and quiet, go really, really, really crazy for a few minutes, right? And then see what happens. Or the other way around. If you did like a lot of stuff, make it really, really subtle. If you tend to be very round and undulating, get really sharp and, and arrhythmic or something, and see what happens. Because sometimes kind of boredom, tiredness, subtlety is the cap to the next layer of release. And so it's good to always explore if there's more to be had. So those are some of my my advice here for Christine.